So welcome back to the James Wingfield Racing channel. I'm here with you again today with another video. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about data analysis and how we can use it to make ourselves quicker as drivers, both in real life and on the race simulators. So let's have a look.
James Wingfield steals it!
So first of all, I guess, what do we mean by data analysis and how can we use it to help us? Most race cars, and certainly all simulators or all the top-end simulators, collect all of this data in the background, and it's available there to export to your computer so that you can kind of retrospectively look over your lap and understand what was good about it and what was bad about it. It's a bit different. The content you get is a bit different depending on what simulator you're in, or if you're in real life, what kit you've got on the car. Most real life cars these days have cameras on board, so you can get like a driver's eye view. You'll often also have a GPS sensor which gives you speed traces, and then you get your lateral and longitudinal accelerations. Sometimes the accuracy is also good enough to position the car somewhere across the width of the track, or at least to compare it to another lap, so you can get an indication of the racing line that was used. What else have you got? Sometimes you've got sensors in the car itself. You can get a steering wheel trace, so a steering angle sensor, throttle traces, brake traces, gear identification, all sorts of data. And the higher up the motorsport ladder, the more data you've got to look at, I guess. If I go right to the top in Formula 1, there's a huge amount of data, thousands and thousands of channels on every car. And it's all recorded using a software called Atlas, or at least it's viewed back using Atlas, which is what I use at work. I'm lucky enough to work at Mercedes in Formula 1, so I have a good appreciation of data from that side of things. But really, most of that data analysis is the car monitoring rather than the driver performance. I don't have a direct link to Lewis Hamilton, so I can't tell him, and far be it from me to tell him that he should be going quicker in turn 2, etc. But with the data analysis that I do is more looking at the tracing or the tracking of parameters over long durations, over the whole race, or maybe even longer. And Atlas is really good for that. And there are other packages out there as well. Motec is a similar type thing that I've used for a Le Mans program in the past. And again, it's very good at tracking car data. But both of those are a bit more involved. And actually, if you're just looking at a direct lap-to-lap comparison from a driver's perspective, you probably don't need to get into that depth. When I started iRacing, I did export my data and load it back into both Motec and Atlas, because they were what I was sort of natural and comfortable using. But I actually didn't really get on with them as lap-by-lap comparisons. Like I say, they're really good at processing data and charting and graphing all sorts of things, which is really good for what I do at work. But for me, when I look at simulator data, or certainly real-world data, I've actually found that there are better packages out there that make it quicker and easier to do the job at hand. So today I'm going to be running through 2 laps that I've recorded, both in iRacing. They're laps of the Watkins Glen in a Formula Renault car, just because that's what I've been racing recently. And I'm going to be looking at those in it's actually an online software from VRS, so Virtual Racing School. It's a free package, and it just allows you to overlay the 2 laps and shows you what was good and bad about each of them, or lets you interpret the data to show you what was good and bad about each of them. As I say, that's the one that I choose to use. I find it quite convenient, easy to access, and fairly kind of simple to use the front end of. In my real world Caterham racing, I use VBox, but again, there are other versions out there. Racekeeper is one I've used in the past, and AIM is another piece of software that I have tried. All have pros and cons, but personally the VBox one is just nice and simple, and also you can even swap data with other cars. Everybody seems to use VBox in the Caterham world, but that's probably for another video. Today I'm going to be focusing on data analysis for the sim world. So I'm going to be using the VRS software, and as I say, my 2 laps in iRacing. If I open up the software, you should be able to see on the screen, I've got an extra piece of software now showing, which has an overlay of 2 laps. This is kind of my starting point for any data analysis from iRacing, but absolutely the processes that I'm going to be running through are exactly the same for the real world. One thing that is generally missing, strangely, from the simulator, or at least the way I do it, that is missing from the simulator, is I don't really have the video to compare directly. You can open it up and you can watch back the video, and you can go in car, you can look from behind the car. There's a whole load of things that you can do there to see exactly how much curb you are using, for example. But that's kind of a bit further down the road. Once you get to your 99% of ultimate lap time, that's maybe when you want to be looking at that. But the views that I'm going to be going through at the moment are probably a bit before that, where I'm just learning a track, and I want to know kind of, I can infer from the data that we see where the car is on the track, so I can get some ideas quite quickly as to what I should be looking at for the next session. So if I go onto the screen here, you should be able to see a cursor, and I'll just quickly explain about the views that we've got in front of us. So VRS, we have down at the bottom left here, you've got the status of the car at the cursor position, so you can just see the arrow here on the what is the start straight, and at that time the steering wheel is basically in the straight ahead position for both laps. I've got no clutch, I've got no brake, I've got full gas, as it says. It's obviously American, so I've got full throttle in both my blue lap and my red lap, and I'm in 5th gear in both laps, so they're both looking quite consistent. You can click anywhere on here and it will update the view, so you can see now I'm in 6th gear, again straight on the steering wheel. If I go into a corner by clicking down here somewhere, now you can see down here I've got a different amount of lock on the 2 laps, so the blue lap has a bit more steering lock than the red lap. Again, we can get into a bit more detail to what that means later on. The 2 laps I've got loaded, the software is quite good at showing you here. So I've got on the right, I've got my comparison lap, and on the left is my target. So I tend to use that as my quickest. This one was done on the 21st of January, and just fairly randomly I've selected a lap from a few days before, which was done on the 16th of January. It does give you an indication here of what fuel level you had at the time of the lap, so that's always interesting to note. I was running a bit more fuel for the lap 2, which is the slower of the 2 in this case, so the fuel will definitely play an impact. And the air temperature and track temperature, particularly in iRacing, it's really important to watch those because the car performance changes massively with temperature. Probably a bit more so, well, definitely more so than in my experience in real life, but that's just one of the sort of tweaks of iRacing that we have to live with. So it's always worth keeping an eye on both of those, making sure that they don't deviate too far from each other if you're comparing ultimate lap. Like if you're comparing sort of mid-corner grip, for example, and one lap's really hot, then it may well be that you were on the limit, but the limit was lower because of the temperature. This also shows you the car setup that I was using, which was the same in both cases, so there's no change there. But again, if you're changing setups, you might find that one lap you're really fast down the straight but slow down the corners because you've got a low downforce setup loaded. So on the main page, as I say, at the bottom corner we've got the current status, the left hand side just the track map. On the right is where the detail is. So the top graph is the speed trace, fairly sort of standard as you'd expect. It just goes up, down all the straights, and you can see all of these saw teeth in there. Every time I get to a corner I hit the brakes, slow the car down and then accelerate down the next straight again. The one below is really important. This is kind of the key one really. This is the time delta. So at the start of the lap you can see the stopwatch starts with the 2 times exactly the same. By about halfway through the lap I'm 2/10 quicker on the blue target lap, and at the end of the lap I'm 4/10 quicker on the blue lap. But it's never quite that simple, is it? And there are certain points here, as you see, where the graph is going down, which says I'm actually quicker on my comparison lap. So maybe there's something to learn from that. The next graph down is line distance, so where you position your car across the width of the track. If you're within a metre or so, that's generally okay. If it deviates more than that, there's a sum here. I mean, here you can see I'm 4 metres different, which could be that I've pulled out to overtake someone on one of those laps, or it's unlikely to be a line difference when it's that far different. But you can often see through corners, if I'm going in a bit wider, coming out a bit tighter, then you can start to see that in this line trace. So it's always nice to keep an eye on that one. And then some of the more simple things here, you've got throttle trace, which is exactly that, how much throttle am I applying. how much brake am I applying, and the steering angle is always quite important to look at. It does show clutch and handbrake, but I don't use either of those for this Formula Renault, so that's fine, don't need to worry about them. So if I jump straight into turn 1, as I say, this package is quite nicely laid out. You can see the full track on that last view, but if I click here on turn 1, it tells me immediately that I was 39 thousandths quicker on my blue lap. So there's 400ths that I've managed to gain on that lap. And if in an ideal world, I'll be able to put all of my quickest sectors together across all my laps, and then that will give me an ultimate pace that I should be looking to target. But it's difficult to do, and especially when you don't know where it's gone. So many times you set a quick lap and you think, oh, why was that quick? What did I do differently? And this is how we can sort of dig into that a bit better. So as an example corner here, the blue line, so my target line, the speed is a bit higher later on the way into the corner. So that, you can see, comes from this throttle trace. I've just stayed on the throttle a bit longer. We came in down the straight before, we were at the same speed, but I've just stayed on the throttle a bit longer, and I've hit the brakes a little bit later than the red comparison lap. Also, I've hit the brakes a bit harder. You can see I'm using kind of just over 60% here, whereas I was only at around about 50% of the braking trace for the comparison lap. And the result of that is that I've actually gained a bit of speed in the early braking zone, and I've still managed to slow it down to this point where I'm exactly the same speed as I was on the other lap, which suggests that that's a gain. The speed trace, you can see, shows about 200ths, so not a big gain, but it is a gain nonetheless. And that absolutely looks like it's available for me, so I should be doing that blue lap every time. And the fact that I've made that gain suggests maybe there's even a bit more. Could I brake a little bit later still and use 70% braking maybe? Obviously you can't keep going forever because you will end up locking up either the front or the rear tyres. But certainly the 50% braking wasn't enough, and the car was able to take more. So that 60% braking point looks about right. So that's a good starting point. So we've already kind of found a couple of hundredths just in this very first braking point. And then if you look at what's actually happened around the corner, on the map position, you can see how the track racing line varies. If I go to this point here, so we're kind of through the corner now, but you can see I'm about a metre to the right. So my target lap is a metre to the right of my reference lap, of my comparison lap. And that tighter line I've managed to make use of by, I've kind of overslowed, although I braked later, I braked a bit harder and I slowed the car a bit more in the middle of the corner. And by the time I get to the minimum apex speed, I've managed to slow the car right down, get the turning done, and now I can get on the power more aggressively. So you can see my red curve here, the throttle curve is a bit more ginger, and there's a lot left on the table there where I'm not full throttle and I'm kind of waiting to get back on the power. And really that's because from this curve it looks like I've run a bit too deep in the middle of the corner, and as a result of running too deep I'm having to wait before I get on the power fully so that I can get the car turned and then get on the power. So although I've gained through the entry phase of the corner here by going in a bit quick, I've actually lost again on the exit, which is very common. You'll often see that comparing laps you end up with one faster in and the other faster out, and of course it comes down to which is better. In this case you can see there was that 200th gain on the brakes, which I think is not related because at this point we're still basically in a straight line, so that was just better braking performance on my target lap. But from here on I've lost. On the blue lap, I actually lost out by about half a tenth, just over half a tenth, by going slower through that first part of the corner. But by going slower through that corner and getting the car set up better, I've been more aggressive on the power, and that time, by the exit of the corner here, I've gained it all back again. So I lost about 6 hundredths, I've gained 6 hundredths by this point, and I've now exited the corner at a higher speed, so all the way down the next straight I will be quicker than the red reference lap. So in this particular instance, the sort of slow in, fast out analogy is absolutely holding true, in that blue line was slightly slower through the early part of the corner, much quicker, or slightly quicker on the exit, but because it's an extended run after turn one, it's going to pay back in rewards there. So I lost 600ths, I've gained 600ths back, and then if I go through turns 2 to 4, which you can see here, turns 2 to 4, they are flat out corners, so it's not really turns, it's basically a continuation of the straight after turn 1. But all the way through this, my speed trace is showing me quicker on that blue lap, and that's purely a result of the better exit from turn 1. So I've gained now another 900ths down this straight, or through these curves, and another 400ths down the following straight. So all in all, I'm I gained 600ths, was it, in the mid part of the corner by going in too fast, but then I've lost about 3 times that on the following straight. So overall, slow in, fast out for turn 1 here at Watkins Glen absolutely pays off, and you can see that from the data straight away. Down the straight, there's not too much to look into, obviously. It's worth bearing in mind, though, that sometimes you'll end up with a toe, and if you get a toe, which neither of these laps did, you'll suddenly see that you're just taking away, and you're tearing away. You're much quicker down the straight, and you have to be aware of that, because obviously it's not a realistic comparison if you're comparing one lap with a toe to a lap without a toe. Into turn 5, which is it's the end of the long straight. It's a very fast downhill right-hander. It's a tricky one. Braking on the way into this corner can easily upset the back of the car, and at the midpoint of the corner you can still lose the back end of the car because you're just going downhill, especially if you use the curb. So this one really is all about keeping the car planted at the front, but without unsettling the rear. You want to keep your apex speed high if you can. And again, you can sort of see that's what's happened as I've learnt the track over the sort of couple of days in between. The red lap was set first, and I've probably got a little bit less confidence, so I've gone in, I've actually hit the brakes and come off the throttle at about the right point, or about the same point on both. I've just over slowed the car slightly on the red lap. The braking isn't too far off. Well, the braking is only a few percent. It's basically just a hover on the brake pedal. But the throttle trace coming off the throttle is identical. I'm slightly earlier on the throttle in this blue target lap because I've got a bit more confidence in the car. So I've picked that throttle up slightly earlier, and again you see that it's paying me back on the way out of the corner where I'm quicker, about 200ths quicker on the exit. A slight waver on the throttle here because I guess I'm felt like either I'm running out of track and it's just understeering a bit wide, or I felt that the back's just starting to go, and I just had to blend out the throttle to control it. And that's sort of stopped my rate of acceleration, so it's kind of slowed them both back down a bit, but I've still ended up gaining on the exit. If you look at the steering angle through this, I've got more steering angle on the target lap, which is interesting. I've got a very similar line. We're well within a metre on width of track, so that is pretty much the same racing line. Carrying a little bit more speed through, but I've got a bit more lock. It's possible that might be slightly. It's possible that might be slightly more than I needed. You can see that the exit point is similar on both. It's very easy in real world and simulator racing to kind of put more lock on when you think you need to turn more. But if the car's at its maximum curvature, then more steering lock isn't going to help you. In fact, it actually hurts. It takes the ultimate performance away a little bit, and it overheats the tyres a bit, which similarly then hurts you in the next corner. So it's one to watch for. It's possible that there's a little bit of over rotation on the steering wheel there, so maybe something small to gain by not doing that on the next lap. If we go into turn 6, which is another downhill corner, actually left-hander this time. This corner, one of the keys here is slowing the car down. Again, it's easy to lose the back or to lock either back or front wheel on the way into the corner, and if you do, you'll hit the wall straight away. There's no runoff here, so it's quite a high sort of pressure corner. And there are different lines you can take through it. It's quite a long corner, so you want a nice late apex if you can. The key is always to get a clean exit and to get nice and hard on the throttle. you want the throttle to be coming up kind of as quickly as you can to full throttle. So in this case I seem to have two quite different lines into the corner. I've got the red curve on the comparison lap. I've gone in quicker, I've carried that speed through to the apex of the corner, and then I've slowed down a bit later and I've come out a bit slower. As it happens, the blue curve is the opposite through most of the corner, but the very exit I seem to be the same. So if you consider the red curve versus the blue, then I've gained a bit on the entry again, I've lost a bit on the sort of mid to exit, and then we're equal down the following straight. Magnitudes this time a bit bigger. It looks like there's a bit more significant difference. So there's a tenth that I've gained by carrying that extra speed in, but then I've lost the same. In fact, I lost about a tenth and a half on the way out. And from the picture on the left, you can see that what's happened is I've just gone in a little bit too quick on the red lap. So I've not quite slowed the car down enough. I've run wide round the corner. So although I was carrying more speed, I was travelling further because I missed that apex. And by the time I got to the exit, we sort of converged in lap speed, or in car speed, I should say. But having travelled a bit further to get there, I've just lost out by half a tenth. If you look at the lap traces, the steering angle traces, the blue one is also showing us something interesting here. So you can see I've come into the corner, I've hit the brakes hard and a little bit earlier than the red lap, which is why I've not overshot. I've actually done a much better job of slowing the car down on the blue lap. By this point here, I'm off the brakes and I'm starting to pick up my throttle. I've gone up to about 50%, which is kind of nice to see. It means I'm coming up, I've got a good amount of acceleration, and at this point I've obviously started to get a bit nervous that I'm going to run out of track. I've taken a bit of a tighter entry, so I've hit an earlier apex, and it's just running out wide here, so I've had to hold the throttle at 50%, and as I've started to go up a bit more, I've realised that I'm going to run out of track, so I've had to take a little bit of a lift on the throttle, and that dropped back down to 50% before going to 100% a bit later. You can see in the steering trace that I've held that lock on, and then once I've been happy that I'm not going to run out of track, I've dropped all the steering lock, I've straightened up, and I've gone full throttle, and we've got an exit. It's indicative that that's not quite perfect. I should be able to get a bit earlier on the throttle if I didn't have that double stab. So there's definitely a bit more lap time to be had here. I felt like I was running wide, so maybe slowing the car slightly more at the apex would have allowed me to get the rotation done so I can get more aggressive on the throttle. Or maybe just doing everything else the same, holding the lock on earlier in the corner and just delaying this initial throttle application. If I delayed it maybe halfway to the red curve, it would have let the car turn a bit more before I picked up the throttle, and then I could have got on the throttle nice and cleanly. And this speed advantage that we see here, I could have then carried all the way out through the exit of the corner, and of course down the next straight. And we saw from turn one, when you can exit the corner quickly, it rewards you very heavily because all the way down the next straight you're just gaining. So in this case the blue lap is still quicker, but I think there's a bit more to be had. There's probably another tenth or maybe even 2 tenths if I can just get that exit speed up a bit higher. So from comparing these two laps, I'm already spotting a few things that I need to be working on for my sort of third lap, as it were. I need to be doing mostly what the blue lap is, but here in particular there's some additional learning to go into the next attempt. As I say, in this case the straight, we entered this straight at the same speed in both laps, so there's nothing really to show between them. And turn 7, so we're seeing a similar trend to before, where the red lap is a bit faster on the way in and a bit slower at the middle of the corner. This is interesting though, because actually I was quicker in this case on the red lap. So where previously we had the slow in, fast out approach was working for the blue target lap, actually in this case it looks like it's not working quite so well. The racing line is a bit different. So in the red curve on that lap I took a wider entry and I carried the speed through that entry. So all the way through here I'm quicker, and I get the car slowed down at the middle of the corner here, So this is my minimum speed, so I can basically carry the speed into the corner, slow it down right in the middle, get the car turned, and then come out very aggressively on the throttle. So at this point, I've gone from 0% to 100% throttle all in one go, and I've been able to stay on that 100% throttle all the way out through the corner. It's gained me a little bit of exit speed right over here. Only about, 1.3 kilometers an hour, so not much in it there. But the relative deltas that we're gaining and losing here, there's still a net gain. So I've lost out, the red lap has gained a bit by going in quickly. It's lost a bit in the middle, but then by just coming out slightly quicker, I've gained it all the way through this exit, and the net result is that actually it's quicker in this particular corner to go in a bit faster, taking the middle of the corner a little bit slower, so that you can then come out quicker again. It's always natural to draw a racing line from the outside to the inside to the outside, and it's a nice long curve, but what it can tend to do is it means that you're still doing a lot of turning late in the corner, and that impacts your ability to put the throttle down. I don't want to get too far into the sort of car science in this video, but fundamentally the tyre only has so much grip to give you, and if you're using it to do turning, then you can't use it to accelerate or brake. And at this point here, you can see at this point here in the blue lap in particular, we're now asking for quite a lot of acceleration, but we're still very much in the turning phase of the corner, and that's just not really working for us, which is why I can't get on the throttle as hard as I want to. Whereas the red curve, I've done the majority of the actual turning without any throttle applied, and it's definitely helping here. So there's immediately in this corner alone there's 7 hundredths which I can gain, and because that I was quicker on the slower of the two laps, I can immediately add that to my target lap time of whatever this one was, a 1:43 something. I'll have to check later. So into turn 8 at Watkins Glen. This one is an uphill corner to the right. It's a fairly standard corner actually. It's easy to understeer here. Because the car's going uphill, the weight's already a bit transferred to the rear of the car, so you're more inclined to understeer, especially if you get on the throttle early and it will just push wide. But that said, you can use quite a lot of track on the exit because of the profile of the corner. It's quite a tight corner at the apex here, but it opens up on you at the exit. So although you think you're about to run wide and run out of track, suddenly the track sort of gives you a little bit of an advantage there. So it's one where you can carry a bit more speed than it looks like you can, or than you feel like you can at first. And that's kind of true in these traces actually. If you look at the overall shape of the speed curve are pretty similar. The red curve is the one I set first, and having done a few more laps and a bit more confidence in the car, I've basically just carried a bit more apex speed. I've let the car run a bit wider on the exit because, as I say, that track is there, and by opening up the corner I've managed to just carry a bit more speed out of the corner. And as a result I've gained about half a tenth. So again, another solid gain. I didn't actually come out any quicker at this point here. Looks like the speed trace is the same, so it was all of this was won and lost within the actual corner itself. So in the traces you can see the braking trace spikes early, sort of decays away, because as the speed comes down in a Formula Renault, your downforce level drops away, so you have less braking force available to you. You also want to come off the brakes to let the front come back up and stabilise the car before you do too much turning. So that's quite a common trace to see. The throttle trace, I've been fairly aggressive in both. The blue curve, I have actually had to have a confidence lift here. So where I had this advantage in the, where are we in the corner, the middle of the corner, it looked like I was going to carry that advantage all the way out, and I've had to have a slight confidence lift. That's probably because I'm running wide. It's always tempting, you always aim for the impossible, don't you really? What would have happened without that lift? Would I have got away with it? Sometimes you can, in which case I would have gained all the way out of this corner and down the next straight. So it could be that there's a little bit more to be had there if I could have just held that throttle on. And if I couldn't, then I would have been better off to just delay the application from maybe this 50% point and just gently ramp it up, so that you're always progressively increasing throttle. Really, the last thing you want to do is to come off the throttle at the exit of the corner, because that's just giving up lap time. So there's, again, that was a quicker lap, that blue lap, but there is a little bit more to be had there. Another half a tenth maybe if I absolutely nailed that one. Turn 9 is a very tricky left-hander. I don't know why. Maybe there's a bit of a funny camber to it, but it's very, very difficult to get back into the apex. If you end up wide, you'll never seem to get it back into the apex. So actually, rather than a go in slow, turn it, and come out fast approach, I find that you actually want to turn in a little bit earlier than you expect and kind of hug the apex a bit more than is normally natural. Again, partly that might be because of the shape of this corner. Again, it's another one that opens up a little bit on exit. So if you go in a bit tight, you're going to run a bit wide, but then the shape of the track goes with you, so it works. I'm not sure. That's just how it feels to drive. And this is another example, really, of just gaining confidence in the car. I've done all the same things in the same places, but I've just carried a bit more speed on my blue lap, which is the faster of the two. Hit the brakes very slightly later and very slightly harder, decayed away, and as a result of that decaying away, picking up the throttle, very similar trace on both of them. You can see I've got the same kind of up to about 75, a very slight dip before going to 100%, but this time is a much better looking throttle trace. You can usually, I find in this car, you can usually go straight to 50%, and then from 50% out, if it's a particularly tight exit and you're really stretching the rear tyre, maybe it just needs a bit of a blend from 50% out, but that looks quite nice, to be honest, as a throttle trace. I've just carried a bit more speed in. I've done it once. Question now is, can I do it again? Can I take a bit more speed in, or is it going to then push me wide? And these are the ones that are probably harder to spot, particularly if you imagine deleting one of the laps and just looking as a single lap. It's quite hard to see where to gain for your future approaches, so your future sort of tries. So having 2 laps to overlay like this is really helpful, because it shows that the blue lap has worked, and it means that my next attempt should be kind of the same but more again. So maybe a little bit later again on the brakes, maybe coming off the brakes a little bit earlier, to carry that speed through the apex and see if you can still hang on to the curvature of the car. Turn 10. This is a real confidence corner in this car, with this setup at least. You can see here I've got a throttle dip out, but only to about 70% in both cases. To be honest, this corner is flat. The first couple of laps in a stint, the tyres aren't usually warm enough to take it flat, but after a couple of laps you can. But it's very, very easy on the exit of the corner to lose the back end and spin, or to run wide over the curb, and then you tend to hit the wall if you do that. So the resulting crash is quite a big impact, and will certainly finish a race. So there's a lot of pressure on getting the exit of this corner right, and that's what causes you to sort of take that confidence lift. But looking at this, you can see kind of what that does. It's interesting to note, because I've done the lift at 2 different places. I've had on the red lap a bit of a bigger lift early on, but a shorter overall lift. And the blue lap, I kind of tried not to take that lift, and then in the end I had to give in and still drop to 70%. But by waiting to do it later, it's actually cost me a bit more. Here you can see I was quicker through the early part because I didn't lift as much, but then I've been slower through the exit because I lifted more. And as a result of that, I've ended up only 200ths down overall. But you can see I'd initially gained sort of about 200ths through not lifting as much, and if I hadn't lifted at all, I probably would have been another maybe 400ths quicker again. So there's probably 5 or 600ths of a second here, maybe getting on for a tenth of a second by not taking that lift at all. So that's definitely one to work on as a next lap attempt. I reckon there's a tenth of a second in it on that corner. And then the final corner, turn 11, very fast right-hander, no run-off on the exit, straight into a wall basically. So again, it's quite a big confidence corner, and it looks like in this case I've really done a much better job on the way in using the blue line. I've approached it slightly slower from the corner before, so I was actually losing out on the way into the corner, but if you take it from the point where the 2 speeds are equal, which is kind of halfway through the braking zone, or halfway through the throttle lift-off zone, then from there on I've gained half a tenth, and I've come out still with good speed. So this is just from carrying that speed in. You can see I've been a bit later on the throttle, so I've lifted off the throttle later. I braked a bit later and a bit less. We're very, very little braking anyway here, to be honest. It's mostly a lift, and the braking is just kind of to just stabilise the car and just to put a little bit of weight on the nose to help the nose to turn. Obviously I'm left foot braking here because you can see I'm still using both pedals at the same time, and this Formula Renault car in particular, it doesn't have the greatest front end, so by going into the corner with a tiny bit of brake, it just puts the weight on the front wheels, they get a bit more grip, and it just enables that turn in. It's a tricky game to play though. If you get it wrong, if you brake too hard, you'll end up sending too much weight to the front and the back will go light, and then as you turn, the back end will come round and you'll have to be in all sorts of a mess to try and recover it. But that's what's happening here, and you can see that it's worked quite nicely. A bit less brake, a bit later on the throttle, I've just carried more speed into the corner. As a result, my apex speed is about here. Yeah, 5 kilometers an hour quicker through the apex. It does look like I got a sort of cleaner exit on the red curve. I've managed to be a bit squarer on the throttle, but really that's just because I overslowed the car at the first point. It's not like I needed to slow it that far to do any turning, because you can see I'm basically following the same racing line in both. I've just slowed it down too much because I was lacking confidence, and then realised that halfway through the corner and got hard on the power. And as what you tend to find as you gain more confidence in a track and a car is, particularly on your exits, your throttle applications become a bit more blurred and you can start to blend things together a bit. So if you do truly get a stamp on the throttle like this, it's usually indicative of the fact that it was a bit too late on the throttle, and you can often get a bit of throttle beforehand even if you're not full throttle, and then sort of blend it in afterwards. And that's kind of what you're seeing here. As I say, you can go to 50% quite quickly and then a bit of a blend out from 50% up. So that blue curve I'm quite happy with. I think that's close to the limit for that corner. Of course you can always try a bit more, but looking at that lap as an overall, I wouldn't really focus on that one as a key to my next attempt at a hot lap. So if we go back to the overall page, what's the summary? Turn 1, both laps are fairly close in turn 1, but the resulting long straight meant that the quicker exit absolutely paid dividends, which is usually true. When you go to a new lap, I'll do a different video about preparing for a new circuit, but the first thing you should do is look for where the longest straight is, and the corner before that longest straight, you need to get the best exit you can. And that's kind of rule number 1 of going quickly at a brand new track. And that's true here. So turn 1, I need to focus on a really clean exit. Then through these hairpins, there were a couple where the first few seemed to be slow in, fast out, and that was working well for me. There was one of the later ones, I think is it this fella here, where you can see I've actually lost out overall here, and my red trace was better, and that was the right-hander, the uphill right-hand hairpin onto a short straight, but by taking a bit more speed in and going for a slightly wider line, V'ing the corner off and coming out slightly slower through the middle section, but then recovering it for speed at the exit, net result was that carrying the entry speed overcome the loss of apex speed there. So that's one to consider. And then the last bits, obviously the confidence lift, you can see that was costing me, so that's probably the next thing to look at. So if I'm going to do another lap here, I think the critical thing is to keep doing what I'm doing in turn 1, and if I can do anything to improve the exit, do. The next thing is going to be getting rid of that confidence lift and taking that speed into the uphill right-hander. I've not looked at any of the video directly for this, but you can also go back and look at the video to see if that agrees with the assumptions that I've been making here about where the car is on track. And then ultimately I might even be into the detail of, can I use this particular curb, but that's kind of a bit further down the road. I wanted this to be a bit of a higher level data analysis 101, should we say. So hopefully that's been useful. Let me know in the comments what you think of it. Just going through that already, I've got a few ideas of other things that I could try, other ideas for new videos, which maybe we did touch on in some of this. We touched on some of the race science, if you like, the race car engineering, the weight transfer, the G-circles. So I could definitely do a bit more on that, I think, expand on that a bit. It would also be interesting to repeat this process with some video footage as well, which I might do using my real-world Caterham data, because that comes with the video, the onboard video footage. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you found it interesting. Let me know what you think, and yeah, if you like it, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to try and put out a whole load more content like this, which will help you all use data analysis and an engineering approach to racing that will make you quicker as drivers. Thanks. Keep well, and bye.